Let's talk about something that quietly confuses a lot of people. You walk away from an avoidant, or they walk away from you, and on the surface it looks clean, logical, final. They tell themselves a story that says, "This wasn't right, I'm better off, I don't feel the same anymore." And for a while they even believe it. Their mind builds a neat little box, puts the relationship inside, tapes it shut, and labels it finished. But here's what rarely gets said out loud. The mind is very good at explaining things away, but the heart doesn't work on logic. The heart works on memory, and memory doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient. Avoidants are experts at emotional survival. When connection starts to feel too deep, too vulnerable, too exposing, they don't lean in, they lean back. Not because they don't care, but because caring feels dangerous. So they minimize, they rationalize, they focus on flaws, they convince themselves that what they felt wasn't that real, wasn't that special, wasn't worth the risk of staying open, and yet long after the relationship ends, something strange happens. A song comes on. A familiar laugh reminds them of you. A moment of quiet arrives when there's no distraction left, and suddenly, without permission, the feeling returns. Not the drama, not the conflict, the connection, the safety, the way they felt seen without having to perform. That's because the heart remembers what the mind tried to ignore. The heart remembers consistency. It remembers emotional safety. It remembers how rare it is to be accepted without pressure. You don't forget that just because you decided it was easier to walk away. This is where avoidants often feel the most inner conflict. On the outside, they may seem fine, dating, busy, detached, but internally, there's a quiet comparison happening. No one else quite feels the same. No one else creates that calm familiarity. And that's unsettling because it threatens the story they told themselves to stay safe. What's important to understand is this. Remembrance doesn't always lead to action. An avoidant can miss you deeply and still not reach out. They can feel the pull of the bond and still choose distance. Why? Because acknowledging the feeling means confronting the fear underneath it, the fear of needing someone, the fear of being known, the fear of losing control. So if you're the one who loved deeply, this isn't about waiting to be chosen again. It's about understanding your impact without needing validation. Real connection leaves a mark, even when someone runs from it, even when they deny it, even when they try to replace it. You were not forgotten, you were felt. And sometimes the strongest proof of a bond isn't someone coming back. It's the fact that they have to work so hard to convince themselves it didn't matter. Avoidants often rely on logic and emotional distance as a form of self-protection, not because they lack feelings, but because feelings feel unsafe to them. From the outside, their behavior can look cold, detached, or even indifferent, yet internally it is driven by a deep instinct to maintain control and avoid emotional overwhelm. For an avoidant, closeness isn't neutral, it's loaded. Intimacy represents exposure, dependency, and the possibility of being hurt, disappointed, or trapped. Logic becomes their armor, a way to stay one step ahead of emotions that feel too powerful to manage. When an avoidant begins to feel something real, their mind immediately steps in to assess risk. Instead of allowing the emotion to unfold naturally, they analyze it. They question whether the connection is practical, sustainable, or right. They zoom in on imperfections, incompatibilities, or minor conflicts, using these details as evidence that the relationship is flawed. This isn't manipulation, it's self-defense. By turning feelings into a problem to solve, they regain a sense of safety and control. Emotional distance becomes another protective strategy. Pulling back gives them space to breathe, think, and re-establish autonomy. They may reduce communication, avoid vulnerable conversations, or act emotionally unavailable, not because the bond doesn't matter, but because it matters too much. Distance helps them mute the intensity of what they feel. In their mind, needing someone feels like losing power, and losing power feels dangerous. What makes this especially confusing for their partner is that avoidants can genuinely care while simultaneously creating separation. They can enjoy connection in small, controlled doses, but panic when it deepens. Their nervous system is often wired to associate closeness with pressure rather than comfort. Past experiences, such as inconsistent caregiving, emotional neglect, or relationships where their needs were dismissed, have taught them that relying on others leads to disappointment or loss of self, so they adapt by becoming self-sufficient to a fault. Logic then becomes the tool they trust most. Feelings are unpredictable. Logic feels clean and reliable. By telling themselves they're better off, not ready, or just not that into it, they can exit emotional situations without fully facing the pain underneath. These explanations aren't lies in the traditional sense. They're narratives that help them cope. But this protective pattern comes at a cost. Suppressing emotions doesn't eliminate them. It simply pushes them below the surface. Over time, what was avoided emotionally often resurfaces as restlessness, dissatisfaction, or unexplained longing. The avoidant may not consciously acknowledge what they feel, but the body and heart remember. Emotional distance may keep them safe in the short term, but it also keeps them disconnected from the depth of intimacy they secretly crave. The mind has an extraordinary ability to explain things away, especially when those explanations help us avoid discomfort. For avoidance, this mental skill becomes a primary coping mechanism after emotional closeness or loss. When a relationship ends or begins to feel too intense, the mind steps in to rewrite the story in a way that feels safer. Thoughts like it wasn't that deep, we weren't truly compatible, or I don't actually miss them serve a purpose. They reduce emotional exposure. The mind creates distance where the heart would otherwise feel connection, but the heart operates on a different system altogether. It doesn't respond to arguments or logic, it responds to experience. Emotional memory is not stored as a list of pros and cons, but as sensations. How it felt to be understood, how it felt to relax in someone's presence, how it felt to be chosen without pressure. These memories don't vanish just because a decision has been made. They linger quietly, waiting for moments when the mind's defenses are down. For avoidance, this creates a subtle but persistent inner conflict. On the surface, they may appear resolved, confident in their choice, even relieved. They stay busy, distract themselves, and move forward in practical ways. Yet underneath, the emotional imprint remains intact. A familiar scent, a song, a phrase, or a quiet evening can suddenly unlock a feeling they thought they had already processed. It catches them off guard because it contradicts the narrative they've been telling themselves. This is where the power of emotional memory becomes undeniable. The heart doesn't erase connection simply because it's inconvenient or frightening. It remembers patterns of safety and consistency. It remembers who allowed vulnerability without demanding it. It remembers the rare moments when closeness didn't feel overwhelming but grounding. These memories aren't loud or dramatic. They're subtle, almost gentle, which makes them harder to dismiss entirely. Avoidants often try to override these memories by doubling down on logic. They remind themselves why it couldn't work. They compare new people, searching for differences rather than similarities. They stay focused on independence and self-reliance. But comparison itself is evidence of memory. You can't measure something unless it left a mark. The heart keeps referencing what once felt meaningful, even when the mind insists it's irrelevant. What's particularly challenging is that emotional memory doesn't demand action. It doesn't say go back. It simply says, this mattered. And for someone who equates emotional significance with vulnerability, that realization can feel threatening. Acknowledging the memory means admitting that the bond went deeper than they were comfortable allowing at the time. So the avoidant lives in a quiet tension between what they decided and what they felt. The mind may move on quickly, but the heart moves at its own pace. And no matter how strong the mental defenses are, emotional memory has a way of resurfacing, not to create chaos, but to remind them of the depth they once tried to deny. Sheer safety and genuine connection are far rarer than people like to admit, and the heart has an instinctive way of recognizing them when they appear. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this recognition can be both comforting and alarming at the same time. On one hand, emotional safety offers relief, a sense of calm, acceptance, and ease that doesn't require constant vigilance. On the other hand, it threatens the avoidant's carefully maintained independence. When connection feels this natural, it quietly invites closeness. And closeness is exactly what their system has learned to guard against. Emotional safety isn't about intensity or passion, it's about consistency. It's the feeling of being able to show up as you are without fear of judgment or pressure. It's knowing that affection doesn't come with strings attached, and that space doesn't equal abandonment. When an avoidant experiences this kind of connection, their nervous system notices it immediately, even if their conscious mind doesn't fully acknowledge it. The body relaxes, the walls lower just enough, and for a moment they feel at home. Because this experience is so subtle, avoidants often underestimate its importance in real time. There may be no dramatic highs or chaos to signal that something significant is happening. In fact, the very absence of emotional volatility can make them question whether the connection is real at all. They might confuse calm with boredom or mistake stability for lack of chemistry. The mind looks for familiar emotional spikes, not realizing that what's being offered is something healthier and more sustainable. Yet the heart records the experience differently. It stores the memory of how it felt to breathe easier with someone, to feel understood without explanation, to be accepted without having to earn it. These impressions become reference points, even after the relationship ends. Long after the avoidant has created logical reasons for leaving, the heart quietly remembers the ease of that connection and compares future experiences against it. This is why emotional safety is so difficult to replace. Chemistry can be recreated, excitement can be found elsewhere, but genuine safety is rare. It requires emotional attunement, patience, and consistency, qualities that don't appear overnight. When an avoidant moves on, they may find themselves in relationships that look good on paper or feel exciting at first, yet something is missing. There's a subtle restlessness, a sense that they're performing rather than relaxing. That absence is the echo of emotional safety they once experienced. What makes this memory particularly powerful is that it doesn't fade with time in the same way surface-level attraction does. Emotional safety is registered deeply because it affects the nervous system, not just the emotions. The heart remembers who made it feel regulated and grounded, even if the avoidant never names it. Their body knows the difference between connection that soothes and connection that stimulates. This remembrance can be unsettling because it challenges the avoidant's belief that they are better off alone. It introduces a quiet awareness that not all closeness is dangerous and that some connections don't threaten freedom. They support it, even if they never return. The memory of emotional safety remains as a silent standard, shaping how they experience closeness long after the relationship has ended. One of the most misunderstood aspects of avoidant attachment is the gap between feeling and action. Avoidants are fully capable of missing someone deeply, yet their behavior may show no sign of it. This disconnect can be painful for the person on the other side, who assumes that silence or distance means indifference. In reality, the longing see and exist quietly, even intensely, without ever turning into outreach or reconciliation. The reason lies not in lack of emotion, but in the fear attached to acting on that emotion. For an avoidant, reaching out is not a simple expression of missing someone. It represents vulnerability, exposure, and the risk of reopening emotional territory they worked hard to close. Contact means acknowledging that the bond still matters, and that acknowledgement threatens the protective narrative they built to feel safe. Admitting longing would require them to face feelings they don't fully trust themselves to handle: dependency, desire, regret, or hope. Avoidants often fear that once they open that door, they won't be able to control what comes through it. This fear is deeply tied to their sense of autonomy. Avoidants equate emotional independence with safety. The idea of needing someone can feel like losing control or giving someone power over their emotional state. So even when they miss you, they may choose distance as a way to preserve their identity and equilibrium. Silence becomes a form of self-regulation. It allows them to feel without having to respond to those feelings. There is also a strong internal conflict between desire and self-protection. Part of the avoidant may want connection, comfort, and familiarity, while another part warns that closeness leads to expectations and obligations. Acting on longing could invite conversations they don't feel prepared for, emotional accountability they're unsure they can sustain, or the possibility of disappointing someone again. To avoid repeating perceived failures, they choose inaction. Avoidants also tend to delay emotional processing. They often don't fully feel the loss until much later, when the immediate relief of distance has worn off. By the time the longing becomes clear, too much time may have passed, making reaching feel awkward, risky, or disruptive. They may tell themselves it's better not to reopen something that has already settled, even if it still lives quietly within them. Importantly, longing without action does not mean the bond was insignificant. In fact, it often means the opposite. The stronger the connection, the more threatening it feels to their defenses. Acting would require confronting fears around intimacy, trust, and emotional reliance. Fears that may feel bigger than the desire itself. This is why avoidants can carry feelings privately for a long time. They may revisit memories, wonder how you are, or feel a pang of nostalgia without ever making it known. Their choice not to reach out is not proof that they've moved on emotionally. It's evidence of how powerful the connection felt and how deeply their fear of intimacy still governs their behavior. A deep connection leaves an imprint that persists long after a relationship ends, even if it is never openly acknowledged or revisited. For avoidants, this truth is particularly profound because their natural defense mechanisms push them to minimize, distance, or rationalize emotional experiences. Yet no amount of rationalization can erase the imprint of someone who truly saw them, understood them, or created a safe emotional space. The heart remembers what the mind tried to dismiss, and this remembrance shapes their internal world in ways they may not even consciously recognize. Connections that leave this kind of mark are rarely superficial. They are built on moments of authenticity, vulnerability, and emotional attunement. When an avoidant experiences such depth, it challenges their usual approach to relationships. Normally, they keep interactions at a manageable distance, controlling the pace of emotional exposure to feel safe. But a truly deep bond bypasses these controls. It establishes a sense of mutual understanding and acceptance that feels rare, almost irreplaceable. The heart takes note of this, even when the mind insists it was temporary or inconsequential. The imprint left by these connections is subtle but powerful. It manifests in ways that might surprise the avoidant themselves. They might notice themselves comparing new people to someone from the past, longing for qualities they thought were ordinary but were actually meaningful. They may feel unexplained nostalgia or a quiet ache when recalling shared experiences. Even without conscious acknowledgement, the memory of someone who offered consistent emotional safety and connection becomes a benchmark for all future relationships. What makes this lasting impact unique is that it is not dependent on external validation or ongoing contact. The avoidant doesn't need to be reminded, and they don't necessarily act on the memory. The bond's significance exists internally, quietly influencing their sense of connection, intimacy, and emotional standards. It shapes their expectations and perceptions without overtly interfering with their daily life, creating an undercurrent of longing or awareness that they may not fully articulate. Moreover, this imprint serves as a mirror, reflecting not just the bond itself, but the avoidant's own capacity for attachment, emotion, and connection. It reveals that they are capable of profound intimacy, even if they are conditioned to protect themselves from it. The memory acts as a subtle teacher, demonstrating that emotional closeness is not inherently dangerous and that they can experience trust and comfort without losing autonomy. The heart, unlike the mind, does not argue or rationalize, it simply remembers. Ultimately, the lasting imprint of a deep connection is proof of the relationship's significance, even in its absence. It shows that certain bonds cannot be erased, no matter how much someone tries to minimize them for self-protection. For the avoidant, this imprint may remain unspoken, unseen, or unacknowledged, but it continues to exist within them, quietly shaping their emotional landscape. It is a testament to the truth that meaningful connections once formed leave a permanent mark, resonating long after the relationship has ended. In the end, what we've explored today is that the heart and mind often play very different roles in how avoidants experience connection. While the mind may rationalize, protect, and distance, the heart quietly remembers the depth, safety, and authenticity of bonds that mattered. Understanding this helps us see that even when someone seems detached or has walked away, their emotional memory preserves the impact of genuine connection, leaving a lasting imprint that shapes them long after. So, whether you've experienced this from the perspective of the avoidant or the one who loved them, remember that connection is never wasted. It is felt, remembered, and valued, even silently. Thank you all for being here, for opening your hearts and minds to this discussion, and for allowing yourself the space to understand the delicate truths of love, memory, and human connection.